All right, good afternoon, folks. I wanted to bring you up to speed on our latest topic in change management, the internal and external factors that are applied to every organization in every industry. So with this information at hand, you're going to use it to complete assignment number 1 and journal number 1 as well. So there are forces both internally and externally that act on an organization, and as a result, the changes that the organization tries to make are affected by these forces. So from the outside, the external forces, what we're going to be looking at is fashion pressures, mandated pressures, geopolitical pressures, market decline pressures, hyper-competition pressures, which is one that almost every company is facing, and reputation and credibility issues and pressures. So we're going to break those down. With fashion pressures, this is the type of pressure that affects companies in terms of what is trendy. And every year something comes up in terms of verbiage that applies to change management and management in general. Management by objectives is one that we're talking about here. When companies implement these types of measures, other companies actually try to imitate it. So mimetic isomorphism is one when organizations imitate the best practices that are displayed by other companies in that industry to try to get a big part of market share, get ahead of the competition. So you may have noticed this in the industry that you're working with, that other companies have imitated best practices. That's one of the pressures that are acting on organizations from the external environment. Mandated pressures, almost every company is subject to this, especially ones that are working within Canada and within the province of Alberta. Mandated pressures come from people that make the laws and regulations that companies have to adhere to if, in fact, they want to do if they want to do business in a specific jurisdiction. They originate with governing bodies, the lawmakers. For example, mandated pressures for any company is that they have to file their taxes and they have to do it in a certain way. Geopolitical pressures, on the other hand, are a result of crises that happen within certain geographical areas. One of the ones that I listed here was 9/11 and the Boston bombing. Unfortunately, these are negative geopolitical pressures that act on the companies. There are positive ones as well, but they will, in fact, affect the way that companies do business. The next one we want to talk about is market decline pressures. And unfortunately, most of the companies that we are going to be looking at in today's day and age have been affected somewhat by COVID, and that their products and services have looked at declining requests for their products and or services. So oversaturation in a market, again, is something that can affect the way that companies do business and day-to-day operations. And the one that I listed here is the cell phone industry, where the market has been flooded. So the decline in the need for products, the company is usually faced with that. Hyper-competition pressure, folks, almost every company is facing this. Doesn't matter whether it's mom and pop shop or a mega industry like Nike or Under Armour. Somebody is always trying to chew up that market share and take away what companies have, their position. So sales and marketing strategies have to be reinvented in order to keep up with hyper-competition. Every company has competition, no matter what stage of development they're in or what stage of organization they fall under. Reputation and credibility. Folks, this is one of the things that I really want you to pay attention to, please, because the old adage is that you can spend 30 years developing reputation and 30 seconds wrecking it. It is more prevalent today due to social media. A bad review can affect a company adversely, or in terms, it can really promote a company. So what you want to do is make sure that the people that are running your company are ethically sound, follow good moral judgment, are socially responsible. The two examples that I gave you here were Maple Leaf and BP, the oil company. Maple Leaf years ago had a very tragic episode happen where there was a case of listeria where people actually consumed their products and passed away from them. So really, really unfortunate. Maple Leaf, what they did was the president stood up in front, took full accountability for it, said that they were wrong, paid out large sums of money to victims, and made changes within their best practices and procedures to correct that downfall that they were experiencing. Maple Leaf could have gone under, folks, but what they did was they thought that reputation and credibility pressures really, really were important, and their clients were really important. So they made changes in order to sustain and make sure that their reputation was untarnished. BP, on the other hand, well, I think we know that story. The internal pressures. So not only do pressures act on organizations from the outside, they act from the inside. And we want to walk through some of these. Growth pressures. There is a moment within every industry and most companies that their decision has to be made in terms of whether or not to grow. And that's really a corporate question. So basically, the upper management usually asks this question and decides whether or not they are in the right frame to expand their operations. Identity pressure is always something that companies are struggling with. Brand recognition is a big deal, especially these days with the global economy and globalization, where you're not only competing against people in Alberta, you're competing against people around the world. There's always pressure to develop an identity and a brand recognition that people will utilize and purchase your goods or services. New broom pressure. Some of you experience this at work. New broom pressure, in fact, is when you get a new leader or president or CEO of the company coming in to your company. And one of the first things that the new broom does, in fact, is want to put their fingerprints on the organization. The term is a result of sweeping away old established norms that the company is used to and really putting their position and their thoughts and leadership into action. Sometimes this is a very good strategy, sometimes not so much. People are used to the way of doing things. The resistance can be increased when new brooms come in, and it really depends on that first initial meeting with the new broom. Here at NAIT, we've had a change recently where we've had a new president of NAIT come in. So far, folks, from my perspective, it's been very positive. Power and political pressures. Well, there is always internal power relationships, the struggles, the things that we don't talk about, the political issues that accompany organizations, the infighting, for lack of a better term. This does affect the way that companies set up their operations and conduct business. So one of the things that I want you to remember is that companies feel pressure, and they feel it from inside the organization and outside the organization. The way that they respond to these pressures will result in either success or problems, including resistance to any change initiative that they want to make. The more successful change managers are likely to have a clear understanding of the fact that pressures act on the organization, that they can identify those pressures, and then they can react to them positively and strategically, the better off the organization is going to be. So when you're going through your assignment, you are going to need to identify the pressures that act on the organization. Some companies will only have a few pressures acting on the organization. You do not have to identify every single pressure that was talked about in this meeting. Only deal with the pressures that the company you have chosen for assignment number 1 are in effect. And I want you to please make sure that you have included them and that you have described them in great detail. So good luck with your first assignment.